So yes, my name is Ann-Cathrin. I'm a transport planner at Arup, and I'm going to be talking about pedestrian modelling of mass events. So I recently started doing pedestrian modelling and thought I'd share a bit of it with you today. So pedestrian modelling is more of a niche topic of transport planning, so I'll be giving a bit of an introduction to the basics of the area and then talking you through two of my projects that I've been working on, just to give you a bit of an overview. So pedestrian modelling is fundamentally based on the Froon levels of service, which range from LOS A to LOS F, so level of service A to F, ranging from complete free flow to the breakdown of flow, as you can see on the images right here. And the idea is to better understand how our space is used by people and how do they move through those spaces and how can they safely move through those spaces and get where they want to. There are differences for walking and for queuing. So as you can imagine, if you're queued somewhere, you might be more comfortable with standing closer to other people as you're slowly moving forwards, whereas with walking, you'd want more space to navigate your surroundings, which is reflected in those guidelines that you can see at the bottom. There's also flow rates, which are quite handy in calculating widths required. So if you've got a gate somewhere that's a pinch point, if you know how many people walk through it per minute, you can see how wide that should be. Generally, as a rule of thumb, level of service D is considered generally acceptable. But as with many things in the transport planning world, there are a lot of guidance documents. Depending on the type of event that you have, there's the yellow guide for theatres, the green guide for sports events, the purple guide for music events, and just generally the pedestrian comfort guidance for London, which also is used in other parts of transport planning. And whilst there's probably a guide that will match your specific event, it's always good practice to look at all of them, see what the most stringent requirements are, and if there's certain things that you can pick from one guidance and another to build up the picture of what you might need for your project. In terms of types of modeling, there are the key types of static and dynamic modeling. Static modeling is pretty much area-based calculations using those levels of service, and as you can imagine, it's typically used in the early stages of design because it is quite quick. You can optioneer stuff. It generally gives you a feel for a space, and if your queuing requirements or anything you want to do with the space is suited and can fit. It requires limited assumptions, typically just the number of people you want to have in a space and what level of service is acceptable. And also it can be used to validate your dynamic model outputs, which is always a handy one to do just to sense check what you've been doing. However, static modeling, as the name suggests, is static. You can't look at any longer time periods, and that's where dynamic modeling comes in. So that is at a bit of a later stage of design, once you've got a design. And that can consider human behaviors. You can model more complex scenarios or have different characteristics for different people. So somebody carrying suitcases might be more likely to use an elevator. All those sorts of things can be modeled. And what is especially important for dynamic modeling is that you have the continuous assessment time frame. So in this case, for an arena, you can model from 3 hours up, for example, to the point the event starts and just see how people arrive. Same thing with the intermission and leaving. It gives you that full view of your event or whatever you're modeling. In terms of static modeling, I'll be talking through Project X, which I had to somewhat anonymize, but it does illustrate the concept quite well, so I do want to talk through that. And pretty much here, the client asked us to convert a leisure space to a festival site, and that will coincide with pretty much double the spectators and enhanced security requirements. And they were looking at a maximum queue of 3,000 people. Well, so that is pretty straightforward. There are a couple of requirements within that. So we needed to keep the emergency access free, which is that blue arrow, and also consider an interim and a final layout, where in the interim layout, people arrive both from the north and partially from the south, or from the east, sorry, 30%. And then the final layout, everybody arrives from the north, then traveling through what will be the queuing area to the existing site entrance, which goes around a 90-degree bend. In terms of optioneering, we established that you need about 900 square meters to achieve level of service D, and went through various iterations. You can see some very early stage sketches which aren't to scale, but were just workshopped through. And they both rely on this Disney style queue system, which you'll have seen at airports and events. And pretty much the vertical layout has the benefit of being able to flow straight through the site. You can see it's a very clear north-south line through it, which makes it easier for people to There's a runoff, you can congregate at the end, meet your friends again after security, but has the drawback of the access from the east, with people having to walk all the way back up to then walk through the queue. That would potentially be solved by a horizontal system, which is shown on the right, but you can already see the arrow from security to the entrance gate is a lot more convoluted, and you've got a fence line at the end, which doesn't help things and will probably not be ideal. So subsequently, or at the end of the project, we did favor the vertical runoff. We gave the client the option of including a 5-meter wide access channel on the east to route those people through, but that was ultimately up to them if they wanted to do it or if visitors were supposed to route around elsewhere. We also recommended the relocation of the entry gate at the southern end to take out that 90-degree bend and make it an even smoother transition from north to south and get everybody through nicely with as much space as possible. However, because it is such a big site, ultimately we said you should carry out dynamic modeling once you better know what you're going to do with the site to validate everything we've kind of assumed here. What dynamic modeling can look like, it can be seen with Cardiff Arena. So for that, we did actually do a full mass motion model. So Cardiff Arena is a new proposed venue in Cardiff Bay with approximately 15,000 attendees. And we modeled both the arena and the surrounding street network in mass motion and looked at the arrival, the intermission, and the departure periods. I'll be talking about the intermission just because that's A, the most interesting, and B, is the rare of the two, or the rare of the three, I mean. So typically you only model arrival and departure. We are tasked with reviewing the architect's CAD model, both for safety and convenience concerns within the 30-minute intermission time period, where, as you will know from any concert or big event, a lot of things happen in the intermission. The diagram on the right shows the simplified logic tree. So you've got people leaving, they go get food, go to the toilet, maybe potentially buy some merchandise on the way back, and then make their way back to their seats. And whilst that tree looks relatively simple, actually coding that into the software is a bit of a difficult one, or a bit of a different situation, and that's why logic mapping is essential, kind of validating that what you've done in a simplified manner here actually translates to what you're modeling, and that your assumptions you've made are accurately represented in the model. And then the next thing is queue positioning has to reflect reality. So there's no point in optimizing a queue that loops around 5 different blocks up 3 stairs and into the next side room, because that keeps your aisles free if that is not how people are going to queue naturally. So that is definitely where personal experience comes in, having an understanding of how queues form generally. And as you can expect, it is quite busy, and so we did end up with some level of service plots that were quite red, as you can see on the right-hand side. I've pulled out a few examples. So for the female bathrooms and the bars, those were opposite of what we call the vomitories, so these stair exits. And as you can see, there's a lot of opposing movement, so people going up the stairs, down the stairs, getting some food, going to the bar, bathroom queues forming, and it starts congesting and is not ideal. And can, yeah, just it's not a fun experience and can actually be dangerous for people in the situation. Something similar happened down here at spot number 3 with the men's bathrooms, where whilst there's enough space for queuing, it did actually block up the stairs and the escalators, which in normal operations is fine if you assume that not many people will be moving between floors, because there's no need. But we did flag that to our fire team as a major concern for emergency operation scenarios if something were to happen. In terms of suggested amendments to this layout specifically, we recommended keeping activities clear of the vomitories and the stairs just to minimize those overall movements in that space. We did also test a bit of swapping some of the amenity locations. So we swapped the bar with the accessible toilets, for example, just to give the bar a bit more space. And I said remove those conflicting flows. And then another option we proposed to the client is the active queue management. Whilst this isn't necessarily what you would want in a scenario like this, there are options. So either, again, introducing those tensor barriers or Disney-style queue systems, or some stewards that kind of keep an eye on movements. That is an option that is fundamentally down to the client, but we did recommend that as well, just to manage space number 3 a bit better. And then, just as a couple of key takeaways from my first venture into pedestrian modeling, is that it fundamentally should and does accompany the full design process. from your very early sketches, just seeing if space works, to very detailed models that run over 5 hours and consider all sorts of different scenarios. And the key bit of it is, whilst there is guidance that tells you you need X amount of square meters per person to achieve a certain level of service, behaviors have to be carefully considered. There's no point in optimizing a model if that does not reflect reality. So yes, you can force every little agent to walk on the left-hand side, give way to everyone, but that is not what is going to happen in reality. So there has to be a level of making the model work, but also reflecting what is likely to happen. And with that, personal experience plays a key role. So I said, human beings are interesting people, and there is only so much you can quantify of that. So just having an understanding how cues work and how they form and what people are likely to do in situations where there is not enough space is fundamental to getting a model like this to work and to represent reality accurately. And then lastly, whilst these models, as I said, 15,000 agents, everyone doing different things, different options and decisions, it looks quite advanced, but there's still a lot to be done in the pedestrian modeling space. So this model, for example, only considered people acting individually, but you obviously go to a concert with a group of friends, or you travel to a rail station with your family. And so there's those dynamics that we still need to try and quantify and put into the model. And so that's one that we will definitely have to work through in future. That is my quick overview of pedestrian modeling. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ann-Cathrin. It's quite a, like you say, quite a niche area, quite an interesting area when it's not an area a lot of us will have come across much. Let's see whether Lauren or Neil has any questions initially. If you want to go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Ann-Cathrin. That was really interesting. Yeah, nothing I've really heard about before. Obviously, you gave a great example of, sort of concert festival settings. Have you, or will you, or what are your thoughts on using it perhaps in a more transport itself scenario? So perhaps train stations or bus stations, things like that.
Yes, absolutely. That is where it is used predominantly, where the levels of service started from. We've done work on all sorts of different stations, and that is where it is ideal as well, just to understand through movements and those conflicting ones. So we've done a bit of work on stations as well, seeing if people come from one tube line, want to go to the next, intersecting with mainline trains. That definitely is one for that as well. And in terms of active travel, there's a lot of work being done in the space of understanding pedestrian and cyclist interactions and kind of modeling those accurately as well, because that's obviously a very different dynamic to what you would have in other modeling softwares of pedestrians and cars. And so definitely a use case for all sorts of things.
Thank you.
I think you're on mute, Neil.
Right, I'll put something in the charity box for that. Ann-Cathrin, yeah, I really enjoyed this. I've had some involvement with this topic in the past, and it's really interesting to hear your take on it, given that you've only been at using it for a short while. I'll just say that this difference between static and dynamic, you may know that it was actually a tragedy in our industry that led to the introduction of dynamic modelling. It was the King's Cross fire and the Fennell report, and I happen to have seen the development of some of these models. You've got a good grip of it already, from what I can recall when I used to dabble in this stuff. But you mentioned the intermission and the challenges it threw up. And what comes to me quite starkly is that the impact of a timed event, where everything happens and the focus of all the agents, as you call them, are needing to be in a certain place for the start of an event, compared to an exhibition or a large conference thing where there's a staggered timetable. That can make a big difference, as you've found out. And I was just wondering if you've come across any attempts to apply mitigations to prevent these things happening.
So your question is a bit twofold. Yes, it is very much the nature of these events that they are timed, and same with arrivals and especially departures as well outside of the intermission, that those are the key times when everybody is on the move. It's unfortunately not a staggered thing. And yes, it's definitely in terms of the intermission, it is trying to avoid any pinch points and corners and providing enough space and not funneling people to a confined space. So in terms of disasters, the one that always stuck with me from back home is the Love Parade disaster. So I'm originally from Germany, and same thing. People were being queued into an underground tunnel to leave the site, and then unfortunately, people got crushed. And so it is kind of, unfortunately, as it is, learning from events that have happened to then take lessons from that and avoid them in future. And that is very much that, avoiding pinch points and avoiding funneling people and getting them caught in corners and without any ways to leave.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I think one final sort of question from myself is, particularly with sort of all these events and things where they could be in built-up areas, how do you consider external factors within these? So whether that's other transport system, whether that's other people and users of the other spaces.
Absolutely. There is so for Cardiff Arena, what we did there is we not only modeled the arena and the immediate plaza, but we actually modeled quite a bit of the surrounding street network to emulate people leaving on the tram or getting a coach. And then you can always build in general pedestrian flows, so that would probably more apply to a station, but you can always apply other passenger or non-passengers that just happen to walk past to emulate those flows. There's always the option of making the model more and more detailed and trying to include as many different people as possible in that to kind of, as you said, account for external factors that might not necessarily be related to the event itself, but will definitely have an impact on it.
Wonderful, thank you. And thank you, Ann-Cathrin. That's an interesting topic to see when and sort of exposed to everyone. So thank you very much for that.
No worries.